Two cops disrespected a black female judge. What she did next silenced the entire courtroom. It was already 9:12 a.m. when officers Pratt and Doyle stepped into courtroom 4B. Their uniforms were slightly rumpled from the morning's rush, coffee in hand, radios still crackling with chatter from the precinct. They didn't walk in quietly, either. The door creaked, their boots echoed across the floor, and they whispered audibly as they scanned the room for a place to sit. The judge had already taken the bench. Her nameplate read, Honorable Marcia Holloway. She was known for her composure, respected in legal circles for her razor-sharp reasoning and unshakable demeanor. But what most in the courtroom noticed first was something else: her skin. Dark, unambiguous, and proud. She looked up as the officers entered. No outburst came from her bench. No gavel banging. Just a long, deliberate pause. Silence thickened the room as Judge Holloway's gaze followed the two officers, her eyes quiet but piercing. The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence, unsure whether to continue. The officers didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge the judge. They didn't even sit in the audience. They took the front row, reserved for participants, and slouched into their seats like they were at a mandatory training, not a legal proceeding. A low, almost imperceptible breath escaped Judge Holloway's lips. Then she spoke, measured, steady. Let the record reflect the arrival of officers Pratt and Doyle at 9:12 a.m. Proceedings began at 9 o'clock. Then, as if nothing happened, she returned to the prosecutor. But something had happened, and what would happen next would leave the courtroom speechless. The case in front of Judge Holloway continued, but the room had shifted. An invisible thread of tension coiled in the air, unspoken, undeniable. When the hearing paused for procedural review, Judge Holloway leaned forward ever so slightly. Officers Pratt and Doyle, she said, her tone still calm. I trust the delay in your arrival was due to an emergency? Doyle looked up, caught off guard. Pratt leaned back in his chair, arms folded, an amused smile curling the edge of his lips. Traffic, Doyle replied with a shrug. Downtown's a mess this morning. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Judge Holloway nodded once, slowly. Understood, she said. Though I would remind all parties that punctuality reflects respect, not only for this court, but for the people it serves. Pratt chuckled under his breath, loud enough for the nearby bailiff to stiffen. Didn't know we were being graded today, he muttered. Judge Holloway heard. Everyone did. But she didn't respond. Not with anger, not with scolding. She simply turned to the clerk beside her and whispered something no one could hear. Then, with a composed hand, she struck her gavel once and recessed for 15 minutes. No drama, no lecture, just a recess. But the ripple that followed that quiet moment would prove louder than any outburst. 15 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, the room felt different. Officers Pratt and Doyle hadn't moved from their front row seats, but their posture had changed. Less relaxed, more alert. The energy was unmistakable, a tension neither of them could explain. The bailiff returned first, followed by the court clerk. Then came Judge Holloway. But she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her were two individuals unfamiliar to most in the room. One, a woman in a tailored gray suit with a Department of Justice badge clipped to her lapel. The other, a man in a dark blazer carrying a leather-bound notebook, his demeanor clipped and purposeful. Judge Holloway resumed her seat. These are representatives from the Judicial Oversight and Conduct Review Division, she announced, her tone still composed, almost gentle. They've requested to observe today's proceedings. Pratt shifted in his seat, his jaw tensing. Doyle blinked, glancing to his partner. What the hell is this? He muttered under his breath. Judge Holloway didn't address them directly. Instead, she continued as if she hadn't heard. We will proceed with the hearing. All participants are expected to maintain professional decorum. The message was clear, though she hadn't said it aloud. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It had become a mirror, and it was about to show everyone exactly what they looked like. The next witness was called. A young man named Malik Harper, soft-spoken but steady, took the stand. He was there to testify in a complaint involving excessive force, He adjusted the mic with shaking fingers. It was April 14th, he began. I was walking home from my shift at the hospital. I'm a CNA. I just finished a double. He paused, swallowing. I was maybe 3 blocks from my house when a patrol car pulled up. Officers asked what I was doing. I told them. They said I fit a description. From the front row, Pratt scoffed audibly. Malik looked down. I answered their questions, but it didn't matter. One of them, he hesitated, eyes flicking toward the front row, slammed me against the car. Said I was getting mouthy. Gasps rippled through the back of the room. Judge Holloway didn't move. Malik continued. They cuffed me, shoved me in the back seat, and kept me there for over an hour. No charges. No explanation. Just said they were checking things out. When they let me go, I asked if I could get a name or badge number. They told me to count myself lucky. A long silence followed. Judge Holloway's voice was calm as she asked, "Do you recognize either of the officers in the room today?" Malik nodded once. Slowly. "Yes. Both." Pratt straightened, his jaw set. Doyle's eyes darkened. But neither spoke. The courtroom wasn't breathing. No one dared to move. Because suddenly, they were all seeing it, reflected clearly in the still, unwavering face of the judge. The judge said nothing for a moment. She simply looked at Malik. Not with pity, not with the distant coldness of detachment, but with a quiet reverence, as if she understood, deeply, what it cost to tell a story like that in a room like this. Then she turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have any further questions for the witness?" The prosecutor stood, buttoning his jacket. "No, Your Honor. We rest on the record." The defense attorney rose next, his movements sharp, eager to dismantle. "Mr. Harper, you said you were detained for over an hour. Did you check the time? Is there any proof?" Malik blinked. "I wasn't checking the clock, sir. I was trying not to panic." "And when you say you were slammed against a car, is there?" "Counselor," Judge Holloway interjected softly, "you will treat this witness with the same respect you afford every other person who sits in that chair. Please proceed accordingly." Her tone didn't rise. She didn't bang the gavel. But something about her voice stopped the room colder than if she had shouted. The attorney nodded stiffly and sat down. Malik was dismissed. As he stepped down from the stand, he passed within a foot of Officers Pratt and Doyle. Neither of them looked at him, but everyone else did. For the first time, the room wasn't watching the bench. They were watching the silence between those 2 men and the young black man walking away. And they were beginning to understand what justice truly sounded like. The next witness was called, an older woman named Eleanor Briggs, silver curls tucked beneath a faded blue head wrap. She leaned on a cane, but walked with purpose. She'd seen a lot in her 74 years, and it showed in her steady, deliberate pace to the stand. "I saw it," she said without being prompted. "From my front porch. I live across the street." The prosecutor nodded. "Ms. Briggs, can you tell the court what you witnessed on April 14th? Eleanor glanced toward the officers. Her gaze didn't waver. "That boy was walking home," she said. "Didn't look drunk. Didn't look dangerous. Just tired." She folded her hands on her lap. "Those officers pulled up, got out fast. One of them pushed him against the car. I called out, 'What's going on?' And I'll never forget it. One of them yelled back, 'Mind your business.'" The room stirred. Pratt shifted, his face flushing red. Judge Holloway lifted one eyebrow, but said nothing. "I know what I saw," Eleanor added. "And I know what it looked like." The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. Then, for the first time, Judge Holloway addressed the officers directly. "Officers Pratt and Doyle," she said, her voice soft as smoke. "Do you wish to testify?" There was a long pause. Pratt started to stand, then looked at his attorney. Doyle stayed seated. The defense attorney whispered something quickly, then stood. "My clients will exercise their right not to testify at this time." Judge Holloway nodded once. "So noted." And that was when it happened. She closed her notebook, folded her hands, and leaned forward just slightly. "What you choose not to say," she said, eyes locked on them, "can be as telling as what you do." She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. But the weight of her presence fell over the courtroom like a velvet curtain, soft, but impenetrable. And in that moment, even the officers began to squirm under the quiet scrutiny of accountability. When the judge called for a recess, no one moved at first. People remained in their seats, not because they were told to, but because something about the air in that room had changed. The usual rhythm of courtroom hustle had given way to stillness, to reflection. In the hallway, Eleanor Briggs leaned against the wall. Malik stood nearby, speaking softly with the prosecutor. Reporters hovered at a distance, unsure whether to approach. Inside the courtroom, officers Pratt and Doyle remained seated. "You seeing this circus?" Pratt muttered, voice low but bitter. "This judge thinks she's on some kind of crusade." Doyle didn't respond. "Everyone's suddenly an expert on policing," Pratt continued. "Nobody knows what it's like out there." But Doyle didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the double doors, where Eleanor had exited minutes ago. He wasn't thinking about policing. He was thinking about how she had looked at him. Not angry, not scared, just disappointed. Judge Holloway returned to the bench, and the bailiff called the court back into session. She adjusted her robe and looked around the room, not with judgment, but with something quieter, an invitation. "I want to say something before we proceed," she began. Her voice was calm, but resolute. "This courtroom is not a stage. It's not a spectacle. It is a place where truth is examined, where power is held to account, and where dignity must be protected, even and especially when it is inconvenient." She looked at the officers, then at the gallery. "Some will call this hearing political. Some will call it performative. But for those who have never had the benefit of the doubt or the shield of the uniform, what happens in rooms like this defines everything." She paused, letting the words settle. Then she turned back to the docket. But something had shifted, not just in the room, but in the eyes of those who were watching. Because the judge hadn't demanded respect, she had revealed what it looked like. The afternoon's testimonies were procedural, department policy reviews, use of force guidelines, and administrative records. Dry content. Necessary, but impersonal. Until one form caught the judge's attention. "Let the record show," Judge Holloway said, reading carefully, "that Officer Doyle filed a use of force justification report, but Officer Pratt did not." A hush fell. The defense attorney cleared his throat. "That was an oversight, Your Honor." The two officers were acting in tandem. "I see," the judge replied. "So one of them documented the force. The other, the one reportedly using it, did not." She set the document down gently. "Tell me," she continued, her voice steady, "when it becomes acceptable practice for officers to omit their own actions in official reports, where does accountability begin?" The silence was louder than any objection. Pratt leaned back, jaw tightening. Doyle lowered his gaze. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, we request a formal audit of the body cam footage from both officers for that evening, as well as any prior civilian complaints filed against them." The judge nodded. "Granted. The Oversight Division will be notified today." Then came something unexpected. From the gallery, a small voice called out, "I filed one." Heads turned. It was a young man in his 20s, seated in the back row. He stood slowly, nerves visible but voice clear. "Last year. Same officers. Different street. They threw me against a wall and said it was a mistake. I reported it. Nothing happened." Judge Holloway looked up, surprised but attentive. "Your name, please?" "Devin Russell." She nodded to the clerk. "Please ensure Mr. Russell's previous complaint is pulled and reviewed by the oversight team immediately." Then, turning back to the room, she said, "Justice is not delayed because people fail to speak. It is delayed when no one listens." And just like that, the room shifted again. Because the walls were no longer just holding testimony. They were holding memory. And memory, in a courtroom, is power. Devin Russell sat back down, visibly shaken, but something in his face had changed. Relief, maybe, or the slow unraveling of long-held silence. Judge Holloway gave him a small nod, acknowledging the courage it took to speak. Then she addressed the courtroom. "Let the record reflect," she said, "that multiple incidents involving the same officers have now surfaced. Patterns matter. They're not just statistical, they are lived experiences." She paused. "I have presided over this court for more than a decade. I have watched cases rise and fall on a single discrepancy, and others dismissed despite entire trails of warning signs." She looked out across the room. I will not allow this to be one of the latter. At that moment, the Department of Justice observer stood and requested permission to speak. The judge nodded. Your Honor, the woman began. We've reviewed the officer's records during this recess. Officer Pratt has 5 civilian complaints in the past 3 years. All dismissed. Officer Doyle has 2. Both uninvestigated due to insufficient evidence. Gasps echoed across the gallery. The defense attorney began to rise, but Judge Holloway raised a hand, graceful, commanding. We will hear no objections to data, she said. This isn't conjecture. These are names. People. Then she looked at the officers once more. I want you to understand something clearly. You are not being judged today for wearing that uniform, but neither does it shield you. She closed her folder, folded her hands. You are being seen, not through the badge, but beneath it. And for a moment, the courtroom was silent, not with tension, but reverence. Because when the powerful are forced to be visible, it's not noise that follows. It's history catching its breath. Officer Doyle stood up. It was quiet. No fanfare, no cue from his attorney. Just a man who looked, for the first time, deeply tired. Your Honor, he said, voice hoarse. I want to speak. The defense attorney turned sharply. Doyle. No. Doyle said quietly but firmly. I'm done hiding behind silence. Judge Holloway gave a single nod. You may speak. He stepped forward, not to the witness stand, but to the center of the courtroom. His posture stiff, hands clenched at his sides. I've worn this badge for 12 years. I've done good work, but I've also stayed quiet when I shouldn't have. He glanced sideways, not at the gallery, not at the judge, but at Pratt. There were times I knew the line was crossed. I didn't cross it myself, but I watched someone else do it, and I let it go. Pratt stood up, eyes narrowed, face red. You're really going to do this? He snapped. Doyle didn't respond to him. Instead, he looked at the judge again. I don't want to be that kind of cop anymore. I don't want my silence to cost someone their dignity or their life. The room was breathless. It wasn't just an admission. It was a fracture, one that rippled through every rank, every badge, every assumption. Judge Holloway leaned back, studying him. There is no virtue in waiting until it's safe to speak, she said. But there is still dignity in speaking before it's too late. She turned to the clerk. Please enter Officer Doyle's statement into the official record. Then, after a long pause, Mr. Doyle, you may step back. And as he did, something subtle but seismic shifted in the room. Because courage, when it finally arrives, even late, has the power to expose everything that came before it. Officer Pratt was no longer seated. He stood by the defense table, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes locked on Doyle, but not with betrayal. With fear, because now, the shield of silence was broken, and with it came consequences. The Department of Justice representative stood again. Your Honor, based on the testimony and additional records retrieved this afternoon, the Civilian Oversight Board will be reopening all prior complaints related to Officer Pratt. Immediate administrative leave is recommended pending further investigation. Pratt's attorney began to object, but Judge Holloway was already writing. Leave is granted, and this court will forward today's transcripts to the Internal Review Board. Then she looked at Pratt, not with anger, but something far heavier. Mr. Pratt, she said, her voice so still it cut deeper than steel. This courtroom is not your enemy. Neither is accountability. She set her pen down. But what we allow to grow in darkness will always reveal itself, sooner or later, in light. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was cleansing. People in the gallery began to nod, quietly, subtly, not cheering, just acknowledging what had happened. That justice hadn't come with shouting or spectacle. It had come with presence, with truth, and a black woman in robes who didn't need to raise her voice to command the full weight of the law. The judge looked around the room one last time, not just at the officers or the lawyers or the rows of observers. She looked at the young man who spoke from the back, at the nurse's aide who had been pushed against a cruiser, at the elder who refused to let her age quiet her truth. She looked at all of them, and then she spoke. This court will recess until final review is complete. Findings will be submitted for further action, and this hearing will resume with recommendations from the Oversight Committee. She raised the gavel, but paused. Then she looked directly at the gallery. Justice is not loud, she said. It is not always swift. But if you listen closely, it leaves an echo. Bang. One strike. That was it. The gavel fell. The courtroom exhaled. Some rose from their seats slowly, not wanting to be the first to move, as if stepping too quickly would break the spell. Others filed out in quiet waves, their steps measured, their eyes different than when they'd walked in. Pratt remained seated, silent. Doyle stood beside him, not with pride, but with clarity. Judge Holloway lingered for a moment longer on the bench, then stood, gathering her papers. As she turned to exit, she passed the young woman who had been quietly documenting the case from the back row, just a law student, but now changed. Their eyes met, and in that brief glance, something passed between them. Not words, not smiles, just understanding. Outside, the sky had shifted. The air was cooler, calmer, and yet, it carried something, like the sound of change starting to speak. Because when the gavel fell quiet, truth began to echo. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.